all the institutes. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the members of various think tanks, serving and retired officers, faculty and heads of educational institutes, and other members of strategic community who have taken their time out, their valuable time on a Tuesday in the afternoon. In fact, we are in the evening segment. So thank you so much for joining us for this workshop today. Now allow me to share a few important admin instructions so that we are able to conduct this workshop in a smooth and timely manner. Number one, all participants except the speakers are requested to mute their mics and switch off their device cameras. This will ensure that we have the maximum bandwidth available to us. Number two, any question you might have can be posted in the chat box, and that would be addressed during the Q&A, that is the question and answer segment, which would be in the second part of this workshop. And lastly, all the biodatas of the speakers are included in the brochure that has been already shared with you, and hence they would not be read out in the interest of time. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite Captain Anand Dixit, the president of the Indian Maritime Foundation, to share his opening remarks. Captain Dixit, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, AVSM and BAR, VSM, Director General, National Maritime Foundation, and his team of researchers conducting this workshop, namely Dr. Pushp Bajaj, Research Fellow, Ms. Sarita Fernandez, Research Associate, members of Indian Maritime Foundation, members of National Maritime Foundation, the young participants and teachers, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this workshop on the collapsing marine biodiversity and its implications for the blue economy. The workshop is focusing on two aspects of the subject. One, the degradation of the marine environment, and two, how it affects the blue economy. Before I proceed further, let me explain the term blue economy in simple words, mainly for the benefit of our younger participants. Oceans contain vast amounts of resources, living and non-living. Blue economy means using these resources for the benefit of mankind in an equitable and sustainable manner without harming the marine environment or disturbing biodiversity of the oceans. I think that makes this term clear. The living resources, as you can easily guess, mean the fish and the various forms of marine life that inhabit the oceans. I will touch upon two key points: fish as a source of food and livelihood, and two, the ocean's carbon cycle. Fish is a major source of food for a vast number of people around the world, especially in the poorer countries, where it is staple food, not a luxury. Approximately 3 billion people in the world rely on seafood as a primary source of protein. Over 200 million people around the world depend on fishing or fish-related activities for their livelihood. If the degradation of the oceans continues at the present rate, these resources will be destroyed forever. But is the marine environment really under threat? Well, we have seen pictures of dead whales and dolphins washed ashore, fish covered in oil, turtles trapped in fishing nets, plastic waste littering the beaches. These are very clear visual indications of the degradation of the marine environment and state of the oceans. The sad fact is, oceans have become a dumping ground for the waste that is generated by our modern society. And what is causing this? There are many factors. Global warming, leading to warmer oceans, acidification of the oceans due to high concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, contamination of seawater due to release of effluents and urban waste, overfishing, which is officially termed IUU fishing, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, underwater acoustic noise, coastal and offshore developments, to name a few. All these factors are anthropogenic. That means resulting from human activities. They are a threat to the marine environment and to marine life. To overfishing and wrong fishing methods, most of the fish in the oceans will disappear in about 40 years from now. But even before that, the fish will probably become inedible due to contamination of the seawater and ingestion of microplastics by the fish. And sadly, all this will probably happen during the lifetime of the participants of this workshop. Take a moment to think about it. Right. So with the fish gone, it is straight away a loss of major food source and protein source to the world. But that is not all. One of the reasons for the Earth being able to support life, unlike other planets, is the role of the oceans in producing oxygen and storing carbon. There are tiny microscopic creatures called phytoplankton which live in the upper layers of the ocean. It is believed that they contribute about 70% of the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. So, without the phytoplankton, the Earth's atmosphere will lose 70% of its oxygen supply. You probably thought that only green plants and trees produce oxygen. Well, green plants do produce a lot of oxygen, but not enough to support life on Earth on their own. So while the trees are important, we still need phytoplankton and the oceans for our survival. Apart from fish and mammals, coral reefs and mangroves play an important role in marine ecosystem, but they are all under threat. The Great Barrier Reef of Australia, the Amazon forest, and our own Sundarbans are deteriorating fast due to human intervention. So, as you can see, not only the marine life, but the entire ecosystem of the ocean is on the verge of collapsing. Now we come to the non-living resources. I will mention just a few of them. The first one that comes to mind is oil and gas, or the fossil hydrocarbons from which we get our petrol, diesel, LNG, LPG, etc. Now, time has come to phase out these fossil fuels, which are non-renewable and harmful to the environment. Interestingly, the alternative sources of energy are also offered by the oceans in the form of energy from winds, waves, and tides. The oceans are also rich in minerals and ores, such as polymetallic nodules. It is estimated that as many as 500 billion tons of nodules may be lying on the seafloor. The problem is how to get them out and at what cost. Not only the operational cost, but cost to the marine environment. Although actual seabed mining is still some years away, its possible impact on the marine environment is a major worry. All these issues and more will be covered in this workshop. I can assure you that you have an interesting and rewarding 2-hour session ahead of you. And with that, I conclude my opening address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Captain Dikshit, for your opening remark. It has set the stage perfectly for our discussion today. Ladies and gentlemen and students, before we move forward, may I now request you all to kindly switch on your cameras for around 30 seconds so as to allow us the luxury of taking a group photograph of this particular event and the participants. And as you switch on your camera, please give us a big smile so that we can have a better photograph. So I'll give maybe I'll wait for maybe 10 more seconds. All right. And thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. You may now switch off your cameras and also make sure that your audio is on the mute mode. It is now my privilege and honor to invite the Director General of the National Maritime Foundation, Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, to introduce and initiate the workshop and tell us about the major challenges facing the ocean environment and marine biodiversity. Admiral Chauhan, I yield the floor to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Satyam. Captain Anand Dixit, President of the Indian Maritime Foundation, Vice Admiral Muralidharan, Commodore Ajay Chitnis, Vice President of the IMF, Admiral Ravi Nadkarni, Captain Sarabjit Parmar, the list, Commodore Anil Jaisingh, Commodore P.K. Malhotra. If I was just to acknowledge the luminaries present here, I think we would complete our 2 hours right here and now. So with your permission and your indulgence, I will launch into our workshop straight away, because although Satyam said that we have 2 hours, we actually are already up against the clock, and I do want to leave time available for Q&A and interaction with all of you. So I'll just let you know how this particular activity will run. We will intersperse our interaction first to give you a broad overview of some things that Captain Dixit has not already said, because he has covered much of the ground in terms of the broad overviews. And we will hope in those cases where he has covered things to go into marginally greater detail. From time to time, we will stop and ask for some interaction with you. And so if you will be kind enough as to, if it's a yes, no thing, you know, give us a thumbs up or give us a thumbs down if it's a no. And if it's a question that we want from you, thank you, then in that case, just type it into the chat box really fast, let fingers fly, because it's very much a case of fastest finger first. So I presume that the slide that is the title slide is now visible to all of you, and that you can all hear me, and that my accent is decipherable by many of you. I want to make specific mention of the fact that we are deeply honored by the presence of so many participants from overseas. The Ankara University comes to mind straight away, but that's not the only one. So let me echo what Satyam has already said and say thank you. And now, with that having been put out of the way, let me commence with our presentation today. As Captain Dixit mentioned, we are going to talk about resources, marine resources in general. He's already talked about the marine living and the marine non-living resources. But for today's presentation, we're not going to touch the non-living resources. And even in the marine living resources, we're going to fundamentally talk to you about fish and their environment, and not talk to you about marine bioorganisms or bioactive natural products or submerged aquatic vegetation. We're going to talk to you about fish and the environment of these fish. So, of course, you are aware from this typology slide that there are coastal fish and oceanic fish, and in both cases, they are categorized according to the depth of the ocean at which they generally live and thrive, and nowadays, in the present circumstance, also change and escape from. So we have pelagic fish, and we have pelagic fish, we have demersal fish, bentopelagic fish, and benthic fish. So they all vary from one another depending, as I said, upon the depths that they are found at. So fishing is what we're all about and what we're going to be talking about. And in the year 2000, which is only about 21 years ago, the oceans were relatively to today still teeming with fish, as you can see on this particular slide. However, the situation now is quite grim. Let me give you an example of a cast net fisherman who is fishing really close to the shore. This is traditional fishing, and I'm going to try and read this out for you first, and then see whether we can make much sense of what we're talking about. So it's a typical hot Saturday afternoon in Sasihitlu, which is a small town, a small village, in fact, a fishing village in southern Karnataka. And at 12:30 in the afternoon, the sun is directly above us, glaring through a largely cloudless sky. Surya Salyan, who is 62 years of age, gathers his cast net for one final throw. He enters the still blue water until it's waist high. He swings his arm and he throws the circular net, and it forms a shimmering, translucent circle in the air for just a few seconds before it drops into the water. Then, after a few minutes, he pulls it out, but it has one small fish, a silver biddy, wriggling away, and he throws it on the white sand next to just three other fish that he has caught thus far, and he mutters and says, "This will be a year of famine for us." So is it only about the traditional fishermen? What about the situation for deep sea fishing vessels and vessels that go beyond the territorial sea of India? So one more anecdotal narrative. It's the 19th of January of 2020. It is a balmy and pleasant early morning. It's 4 a.m. in the Arabian Sea, and a large purse seiner. A purse seiner is a big boat which does purse seining, which is a form or type of fishing. It goes about 15 nautical miles into the ocean, as I said, just beyond the territorial sea of India, and its principal sort of catch that they hope to get is Indian oil sardines, and it's ready to head out. Most of the crew of the boat are actually from farms located along the eastern coast of India, and they left because their land did not offer them a living, and they traveled to the west coast. And here they are on the west coast working on big fishing boats, hoping for a better life. But after a full 6 hours, the ship returns completely empty-handed, and the crew members earn nothing for that particular day either. So the question is that if this proceeds onwards, by the year 2050, this very well might be the appearance of the Indian Arabian Sea. There are no fish. So naturally, the question is, why have all the fish disappeared? गायब कैसे हो गई हैं? Why have they disappeared? And the answer here lies in four factors that were touched upon by Captain Anand Dixit. One, overfishing. Two, the pollution of the oceans. Three, the impacts of climate change. And four, the introduction and the profusion of invasive species. And these four topics are what will comprise our presentations before you today. So let me start with overfishing. And let me ask you some questions on this subject of overfishing. If you were a fisherman and you were told that the fish were becoming fewer in the sea, then do you think you might fish more, or would you be fishing less? Let me ask somebody. Let me ask, we have Aruna Gaikwad here. Aruna, are you there? Aruna, please tell us you're there. Yes, Aruna, no, Aruna. No? Okay, let me turn to somebody from what I think is probably overseas. Julio Lira. Julio, are you there? And if you are, could you unmute your mic? Let me just check. Well, we still don't have an answer, so presumably people are having a harder time unmuting than I thought. But what would you think? You would think, obviously, that if the fish were becoming fewer, we would, in fact, fish less. But in actual fact, as the fish stocks are depleting, fishermen going out to sea actually tend to fish more because they're not sure whether when they go out for the evening catch or the next morning's catch, there will in fact be fish. What about another question? If you bought yourself a new fishing boat that could go deep into the sea, would you want to catch more fish? Or would you want to catch less fish on each fishing trip that you go upon? Once again, these are questions that I would like to pose towards the end of the presentations that we will make. And once again, ask you, so what do you guys think? If you bought a new fishing boat, then is the fishing boat able to take you out to deeper waters? And is that a good thing? Or did you have to pay money? How are you going to pay that money back? And so therefore, are you incentivized to catch more fish or to catch less fish? And Chaitanya says more fish. And that's probably what I would think too. So the capital cost of the new fishing boat needs to be amortized over time, but done as quickly as possible. So subsidies that are offered to large conglomerates of fishing are not offered to small fishermen. So the small fisherman says, wow, the boat costs so much money, I need to recover my cash, and let me do this as quickly as possible. But there are conscientious responses as well saying that no, maybe we'll catch fewer fish. Let's talk about this towards the end. So if the government was to subsidize your new fishing boat, would that make you fish more? Or would that make you fish less? Shruti says, if the government was to subsidize our boat, then fish more. And Malvika says, yeah, fish more. And Ramshad says less. And Chaitanya says more. So by and large, people are saying that we will be fishing more, except some of you who are conscious of the problem are indicating that we will fish less. So one more, if you were the government now, and you wanted your country's fish exports to grow, would you ask your fishermen to fish more? Or would you ask them to fish less? Once again, this is the point that was being made by Captain Dixit when he was talking about the blue economy. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about the economy? Then babies, fish more, fish. Because the more you fish, the more I export. The more I export, the more foreign exchange I earn. The more foreign exchange I earn, the better is my GDP. Or is it about how blue is your economy? If it is about how blue is your economy, then I would go with all the people who are saying we should be fishing less. So there is an active amount of yeses and mores, and there's an active amount of no's and less. So clearly, we need to address this problem head on. And as we progress down this particular workshop, towards the end, we will have time to discuss this and find out why some of you feel that you will fish less and why others feel that you will fish more. The other factor, of course, is the pollution of the ocean. And once again, I want to emphasize that plastic doesn't poison only the fish, the big trophic layers. It also poisons ocean bacteria and zooplankton. So to get to the bottom of what is causing the fish to disappear, I'm afraid we need to look all the way at the very bottom of the marine food chain and enter the world of plankton. This word plankton stems from the Greek word planktos, which means drifters, which are pretty much like I used to be as a kid, just drift along wherever the current takes me, wherever the tide and the wind wish me to go. So planktons come from that group. And phytoplankton are microscopic plants that actually are found in the oceans. And how do they get their energy? They get their energy from photosynthesis. They form the base of the marine food chain. And what you're seeing are actually on the screen are actually phytoplankton seen under a microscope. And they come in a variety of shapes and sizes, but algae and photosynthetic forms of bacteria are actually the more common types of phytoplankton. And yeah, we know phytoplankton produce some percentage of the world's oxygen, but how much? Any guesses? Anything in the chat box to indicate how much you think phytoplanktons contribute to the world's oxygen amounts? Let me quickly look. 75, 70, close, but no cigar. So, yeah, some of you said 80, 60, 80. Yep, absolutely bingo. So phytoplankton thank you very much, produce as much as 80% of the world's oxygen, and yet all the 12th standard students in our workshop will be divided up into those who have heard of phytoplankton and those who even care. So phytoplankton hoga, phytoplankton, हमें क्या लेना देना phytoplankton से? But yet, the marine food chain is sustained by phytoplankton. So we have phytoplankton, which are consumed by zooplankton, then they get consumed by mackerel, and then they get consumed by tuna, and so on until you come to the top of the food chain where you have orca, the killer whale. Zooplankton, which is the next in line, are actually the animal component of the planktonic community. And zoo, as many of you are aware, stems from the Greek word for animal. So these are heterotrophic. Heterotrophic, what on earth is heterotrophic? It means other feeding, literally, meaning that they cannot produce their own food and they must consume instead other plants or animals as food. And in particular, this means that zooplankton eat phytoplankton. And zooplankton, once again, range from microscopic organisms to large jellyfish. And here too, they form a link, a key link between the phytoplankton, which are called primary producers, and the higher trophic levels, which you know and I know as fish. So the main thing is that as these phytoplankton float about and are consumed by the zooplankton and so on and so forth, as I've just mentioned, the fact is that if the temperature changes dramatically, then the phytoplankton alter their behavior. So when phytoplankton tend to thrive in cooler waters, and if the waters become warmer, they migrate to cooler patches of the ocean. And this migration pulls the rest of the marine life with it. So where the phytoplankton go, there the zooplankton go. And where the zooplankton go, there the trophic fish go. And sometimes these guys, these phytoplanktons, they dive deep into the ocean and have what is called vertical migration. They change their depth. Human beings, as will be told a little bit later, also do something similar, but they change their height. And also, the phytoplankton tend to move horizontally. But I told you the drifters, how do they move? How do they move? So they look out for currents that take them from warmer waters towards cooler, colder climes. And the loss of phytoplankton means more carbon dioxide trapped in the Earth's atmosphere and an even hotter ocean's temperature, and then even more phytoplankton death, plus more phytoplankton migration, and all this takes those fish with them the entire marine chain. And to tell you about what's happening in this regard, I want to be able to introduce three people. One are sardines, the other are mackerel, and the third is Dr. Pushp Bajaj. So, Dr. Bajaj, I'm going to hand it across to you and take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Admiral Chauhan, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me
A
just
little louder.
Yes, yes. How about now, sir? Can you?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Yes, thank you, sir, and good afternoon, everyone. Before we dive into the details of how climate change is affecting the ocean environment and also how it is changing the distribution of marine species, let me ask you a quick. Uh, can someone tell me what are these two fish species that are on your screen right now? We can have some people type into the chat box, or if you want to just jump in and take a guess. Let me ask someone. So, do we have Kiran in the audience? Could you tell us, make a guess? What do you think are these two fish species that are on your screen?
So is
We
it
have
a sardine?
absolutely, you're correct. Yes, the first one is called the Indian oil sardine, and its Hindi
Sardine.
name is Tarli, and its Marathi name is Parva. And this species actually accounts for 17 to 20% of India's total marine fish catch. So quite a lot, quite significant for the Indian fisheries industry. And the second one is called the Indian mackerel, or the Hindi name is Bangra. And together, these two species account for over zero point 0.8 million tons of annual fish catch, which is valued at over 150 million US dollars. So clearly, you can see that these two fish species are very important commercial species for the Indian economy. Now, you would be surprised to know that these two species are actually having the time of their lives in the last few decades. They were traditionally in around the mid 1980s, 1970s. They were mostly isolated to latitudes closer to the equator. And they are temperate fish, which means that they enjoy hot waters. But now, because of the temperatures increasing in the ocean, they are now able to expand their reach to higher latitudes. And that is good news for India because the population is in coastal waters. However, scientists believe that if this trend continues, if the ocean continues to warm, then they might reach a critical threshold after which they will not be able to survive in those hotter temperatures, and then they might have to leave India's coastal waters. So that means that this situation where these are now very important commercial species that might change in the future as the temperature increases. And this is exactly what I'll be digging deeper into this issue of how climate change is affecting the ocean environment and changing the distribution of marine species in the next few minutes. So this slide here gives you a very broad overview of all the ways in which climate change interacts with the marine environment. So if we start from the top right-hand corner here, we know that human activities such as industrial pollution, vehicular pollution, and other types of economic activities lead to an increase in atmospheric CO2 into the atmosphere. So the concentration of CO2 is building up, and that because CO2 is a greenhouse gas, it leads to an increase in the greenhouse effect in the atmosphere. Also, part of the CO2 that is emitted by humans is actually absorbed by the ocean and it gets dissolved in the ocean water. And if there are any chemistry students in the audience, you would know that when CO2 is dissolved in water, it generates H2CO3, which is an acid. So it increases the acidity of the ocean water. And that can have consequences for some of the calcareous organisms. So that's just a scientific term for organisms that contain calcium in their structure. And because calcium is dissolved by acid, so increasing acidity can affect those organisms. Now coming back to the atmosphere, like I said, greenhouse effect increases because of increasing CO2. That increases the temperature and other properties of the atmosphere, which can also have an effect on coastal ecosystems such as mangroves and seagrass, as Captain Dixit also mentioned in his opening remarks. We know that as the atmospheric temperature is increasing, the ocean temperature is also increasing because the ocean and atmosphere, they interact with each other. And that can lead to migration of certain species as Admiral Chauhan mentioned, that phytoplankton are also changing their distribution in the marine environment. So in the next few slides, I will talk to you in some more detail about each of these aspects and how they're affecting the marine environment. So moving on to the first issue that we have here, the primary issue, which is of increasing temperatures. So this graph here is showing you the change in temperature from the year 1880 to just last year, 2020. And the zero here corresponds to the average of over the 20th century. So if we take the average of the temperature from the year 1900 to 2000, that will be the zero. And you can see that from the early 1900s to just the last couple of decades, we have seen an increasing trend in ocean temperatures, a relentlessly increasing trend in ocean temperatures. Now, this is telling us what has happened so far. But what is also important for us to figure out is how these things are going to change in the future so that we can appropriate adaptation and mitigation actions to actually deal with these issues. So before I get into how we make predictions for the future, let me ask you a question. Can someone tell me what is the difference between adaptation and mitigation? Anyone? So let me get some people. How about Anushka? Anushka, are you present? Can you share with us what do you think? What is the difference between adaptation and mitigation? Can you hear me, Anushka? All right. How about someone else? You could also type it in the chat box.
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Mubarak.
Yes, Mubarak. Go ahead, please.
So, the basic difference between adaptation and mitigation is that adaptation is a kind of methodology to adapt with the change happen due to the climate change. And mitigation is a way to mitigate or to remove the carbon dioxide from the oceans or from the surface.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're absolutely correct, Mubarak.
Thank you.
The basic, in simple terms, if we put it, mitigation corresponds to our efforts to tackle the causes of climate change. So as Mubarak was saying that mitigation measures involve reducing our carbon emissions. So we are talking about how to reduce the causes of climate change. When it comes to adaptation, then we are talking about ways to deal with the impacts of climate change. So when we accept the changes that are occurring, and we are trying to figure out ways of how to manage those impacts. So that's the basic difference. Thank you, Mubarak. So coming back to this question of how do scientists actually make predictions about the future? And I'm sure that you will agree that that one of the critical uncertainties when it comes to predicting the future is the aspect of how we will react to the threat of climate change. So we have to look into how humans will react in the different aspects. So let's say our economic activity in different sectors, the energy consumption, also the land use and changes in forest cover and changes in agricultural practices, population growth, etc. And all of these factors will determine how much we will be able to control our carbon emissions. And so scientists have now devised a few standard scenarios which take into account some of these changes. So we have a low emission scenario in which we take urgent transformative action to mitigate our carbon emissions. That is our best case scenario, and it is called RCP 2.6. Now, the RCP term corresponds to a representative concentration pathway, but the name is not important. What we need to understand is RCP 2.6 is the low emissions scenario. Then we have RCP 4.5, which corresponds to the moderate emissions scenario, in which we take some measures to mitigate our carbon emissions. And then there is RCP 8.5, which corresponds to the high emissions scenario, in which we essentially do nothing to mitigate the challenge of climate change. And so with that background, let's look at how we expect the future of the ocean warming. So this graph here is showing us the year on the x-axis going from 1955 to the year 2100, so the end of this century. And on the y-axis, it is showing the ocean heat content, the change in ocean heat content. And you can see that clearly the ocean heat is expected to increase going into the future. And the red graph here, that corresponds to RCP 8.5, so the high emissions scenario, and the blue one corresponds to the best case scenario, which is the low emissions scenario. So clearly, the decisions that we make right now will have an impact on how much the oceans will warm in the future. So now, why does that matter? Why does it matter if the ocean temperature is rising? There are actually many factors, many knock-on effects that come as a result of oceans getting warm. And to understand one of them, let me again ask you a question. So if there are any chemistry students, or I mean, actually this applies for most of us. Let's say I have two glasses of water. I have a glass with cold water and I have a glass with hot water. And I'm about to drop a sugar cube in both of them at the same time. So which one will dissolve the sugar cube faster, the cold water or the hot water? All right, we have some responses in the chat. So most of you are saying hot water. I'm assuming that this is a very simple question because you have probably done this yourself in your lives at some point, that you have hot water and you have to mix some either like a teaspoon of salt or sugar. And we know that solids dissolve faster in hot water than they do in cold water. However, it is exactly the opposite when it comes to gases. We know the gases actually dissolve better in cold water than they do in hot water. And you have also experienced this in your lives. You know, when you have a glass of Coke, everyone likes to have a cold glass of Coke. Nobody likes warm Coke. And why? Because in a cold glass of Coke, you have a lot more fizz. And that fizz is essentially carbon dioxide, which is dissolved in that glass of Coke. So we know that gases dissolve better in cold water than they do in hot water. And this has huge consequences for the ocean as well, because the ocean water contains many important gases for the marine biodiversity. And one of them is, of course, oxygen. And oxygen is, of course, very important for the marine species. So this graph here is showing the year, again, on the x-axis from 1900 to 2100. And on the y-axis, it is showing the change in the oxygen content. And you can clearly see that there is a sharp decline in the oxygen content because of these rising temperatures, and of course, because of other things as well. But rising temperatures play a very important role. And again, the red curve corresponds to RCP 8.5, the high emissions scenario, and the blue curve corresponds to RCP 2.6, the low emissions scenario. So you can see again that if we do take mitigating action right now, then that will have an impact on how much the oxygen is reduced in the ocean water. So what are some of the other consequences of ocean warming? Another consequence is increased stratification. So what is stratification? Stratification is actually a natural phenomena that occurs in the ocean water column. And because we have like a top layer of the surface layer of ocean water, which interacts continuously with the atmosphere, and it also affected by wind patterns. And then just below that, we have the mixed layer, which is a very turbulent layer. It is a highly active layer. And then below that, we have the deep ocean, which is relatively calm and relatively colder and also isolated from the other layers of the ocean. So between this mixed layer and the top layer, there is continuous exchange. And because of ocean warming, now what is happening is that the surface temperature is rising. And as the surface temperature rises, the temperature difference or the temperature gradient between the surface layer and the mixed layer is increased. And because of this increased temperature gradient, it becomes more difficult for the layers to mix with each other. So they become more stratified, or in other words, more separated. And that has, again, consequences for the marine life, because this mixing is very important for the nutrients and the gases like oxygen to mix between the different layers of the ocean. Okay, there are also some more visible impacts of rising ocean temperatures. So moving on, can somebody tell me what you see in this graph, in this image here? Any volunteers, or otherwise I could maybe call out a few names.
Bleached coral reefs.
This one bleached though? You're right that this is a coral reef, but it is not bleached yet. So this actually, you can see all the colors. You can see the vibrant nature of the coral reef. It's actually very healthy coral, and you might be surprised to know, or maybe you won't be, but this is actually an image of the coral reef system in Malwan, Maharashtra, just outside of Pune, 8 hours outside of Pune. And you can see that this is a healthy ecosystem. And coral reefs, in fact, all over the world, they provide around 25%. They provide habitat for around 25% of all marine species. So they're very important and very critical ecosystem. Now, what is happening because of rising temperatures is that they turn from those colorful, really pretty looking coral reefs into these ghostly looking white colored coral reefs. And that is because of, as I believe it was Shruti, was it? So you mentioned before that this is coral bleaching. So now when they turn from those very bright colors to this white color, that's the process of bleaching. And that's because as temperatures increase, there are some microorganisms that live on the surface of corals. They escape the surface and they go to the ocean water, and that with that goes the color of the coral as well. And if this is sustained for longer periods, so for example, during heat waves, when this condition lasts for many weeks or many days, then this can actually lead to corals dying, and this can lead to death of corals. Bleaching itself is not a sign of death. So corals, if they bleach, that is a natural phenomenon. So once they bleach, the microorganisms can come back when the temperatures come back to cooler temperatures. But if it is sustained for longer periods, if they are in this bleached state for longer periods, then that causes them to die out. In addition to the climatic changes that I've talked about before, the rising temperatures, stratification, etc., there are also other direct human impacts that are leading to changes in the marine environment. And one of them is marine pollution. So this image is showing you the discharge of untreated sewage, industrial effluents into the ocean water. Now, this untreated sewage actually contains large quantities of nitrogen and phosphorus, which is then added into the ocean water. Now, if there are any chemistry or students, you might be thinking, well, nitrogen and phosphorus are actually good for plant life and also for marine life. So what is the problem here? And you are right that nitrogen and phosphorus are actually essential nutrients for marine life. So if they're introduced in small quantities, then they are in fact a good thing for microorganisms like phytoplankton. But unfortunately, like most things in life, too much of a good thing can be a really, really bad thing. So this image here is giving you an example of uncontrolled, excessive, unnatural growth of phytoplankton because of such discharge of untreated sewage water. So when there is too much of these nutrients, then that leads to excessive growth of phytoplankton, and then it looks like this. Of course, this is not natural, so this is not consumed by the marine food chain. It just sits there. It just sits there in the sun and it rots. It rots and it decomposes. And when it does that, it actually consumes oxygen from the water body. And it does not have to be in the ocean. It can be in a river or in a lake. But when it decomposes, it consumes oxygen from the water body. And when that happens, it can reduce the oxygen level very drastically in a short period of time. And that can lead to mass die-offs of fish that are present in the water body. So again, too much of a good thing can be a really bad thing, and too much of these nutrients can lead to excessive growth of phytoplankton. Now, to sum up and to kind of summarize what we have discussed so far, changes that we have discussed and how those changes are going to impact the phytoplankton species. Because phytoplankton form the basis of the marine food chain, it's very important to understand how these changes will affect phytoplankton. So we started with talking about higher temperatures. So higher temperatures, as Admiral Chauhan mentioned, has negative impacts on phytoplankton. but it depends on the species. Some species are more tolerant than other species. Then we talked about increased stratification, which will lead to reduced availability of nutrients in the surface water. And that will most certainly have negative impacts on the phytoplankton species. Then there is the introduction of nutrients from human activities, such as discharge of untreated sewage water. And so this can have, as I said, positive impacts in small quantities, but in most cases, it is not done in small quantities, and therefore it will have a negative impact when it is introduced in excess. We also talked about reduced dissolved oxygen. That again depends on the species. Some species are more tolerant than the others, but for most cases, this will have a negative impact on the phytoplankton species. So you can clearly see that it is not a very simple answer. There are many factors and they interplay with each other, and then they determine how the marine species will respond. So now at this point, we are almost at the middle point of our workshop. And so this might be a good time to take a short stretch break, and then we can come back in the next 5 to 10 minutes, sir, if that's okay.
So five minutes would be good so that we can stretch and not get a backache and neck ache and then back and restart in 5 minutes from now. So we now are at 53, and I think at 7 minutes we'll make it. So 1800 we'll recommence. And then we will be asking that the proceedings will be changing around from Dr. Push Bajaj, and the baton will be taken up by Ms. Sarita Fernandez. So guys, we'll switch off our videos and mute our mics. And then when we start again at exactly 1800, 6 minutes from now.
Sarita, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Did you unshare your screen? Because I did not see any screen at the moment.
Yeah, so I think I was sharing my screen and it just went off. I was just calling Oliver to check what happened. My sharing rights, I can't, the share button is not there anymore.
Yes, Sarita, I made DG the presenter. Should I make you the presenter?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Now my sharing rights have also gone.
That's because only one can share, sir.
Okay, then is Sarita sharing? Yeah, okay. So Sarita, this is your screen right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So Oliver, be aware that as Sarita finishes, then it would be switched over to me again.
Sure, sir.
We're 1 minute to go, so be on time, Sarita.
Yes, sir.
Sarita, would you be keeping your video on?
Yes.
I cannot see any video at the moment. That's why I asked.
You see it now?
Okay, so I think both of your devices have the audio on, as in the mic. So there is an echo. So you can.
Is the echo there now?
Yes, still, I can still hear the echo.
Now?
You need to unmute the device from which you do not intend to
Okay,
speak.
is it better now?
Yes, yes. Now I
Okay,
can
awesome.
see you and hear you. So Sarita, we are at 1800 hours, 6 p.m. So
Great.
I think we're good to go.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome back from the break. My name is Sarita Fernandez, and marine biodiversity has basically been an integral part of my work and my interest. And so, you know, we'll be speaking a little bit on basically that front and what invasive species are, as Adaptation mentioned in his
sorry to interrupt
presentation,
your.
and a little bit on that topic, you know, that we know about. So starting off with winners and losers. So Dr. Bajaj took us through the entire segment of climate change and its impact on the oceans and the different marine ecosystems, the layers and stuff. And let's talk about species. Let's talk about, you know, the marine life that lives in the ocean, apart from us who use these oceans for all our activities. And basically understand who are the winners and losers of this. So the winners may not be friendly. Not all phytoplankton are beneficial to human or marine life. Empirical evidence suggests that the changing conditions of the ocean might favor certain toxic species such as Noctiluca scintillans. So coming to the topic on invasive species and what these species are, where they are, why do they come to be, and what do they do to the marine ecosystem, and how are they related to collapsing marine biodiversity in the oceans. So to briefly understand invasive species in the marine ecosystem, we need to understand what we understand on the entire subject. You know, when I hear about marine invasive species or invasive species, people talk about you know, indigenous trees and insects, and we need to not, you know, we need to say no to exotic species and yes to local. And when you bring this to the marine front, it has a different definition, not because of its characteristic or what we know about it, but because of its impact and what it does in the ocean environment and the ocean ecosystem. So invasive species can be introduced by mistake or with a purpose like fish farming, or they have evolved and adapted to new changing conditions because of climate change or other related factors that we talk about. With regard to the bottom of the food chain, which is the phytoplankton, which is this, underdog and the hero, and is responsible for 80% of the oxygen that we breathe currently. So Noctiluca scintillant sea sparkle, which creates these bright blue waves that you can see in front of your screen, is a phytoplankton, and it invades other phytoplankton species such as healthy diatoms. So healthy diatoms are those species of phytoplanktons that basically are responsible for the creation of oxygen and the other ecosystem functions that they're responsible for. Noctiluca, as a phytoplankton who has now begun invading other phytoplankton species, have adapted and evolved to greater numbers with marked resilience in terms of survival in the face of climate change as well as human factors. It creates in its wake dead shoals of fish, adversely impacts all coastal and marine ecosystems, all coastal and marine sectors, thus, and the blue economy. But when you talk about the oceans, I mean, the first question that comes to your mind is this is a place with no tolls. The highway is it's a freeway all across. So, how could species become invasive? Like, can't species just swim from one corner of the ocean to the other? If you tell me there's an invasive species in a forest in, say, southern Australia that is now found in the alpine forest, I can understand that. Yeah, that's like a big stretch. But in the ocean, the roots available species can swim freely. So how do you understand this concept of marine invasive species? It is true that most marine species migrate across the oceans, and yet not all of them are known to be classified as invasive. Species have always used the oceans to move about the planet by swimming or hitching a ride on a log, leaf, or coconut. Organisms have found new worlds in which to thrive. The process, which has been moderate, limited by currents and the winds. So this was a very prominent article by the National Geographic Society, which sort of tried to explain, how marine invasive species come to be and why they are different from this idea that they're all drifters and migratory and so on and so forth. So to understand this entire complex, subject, like, okay, now I'm confused because some are invasive, some are not invasive. We have several frameworks developed by scientists from different, networks, from different governments, from different departments, who basically make such frameworks to help policymakers, to help people in, in the administrative framework to basically take measures to do something about it. And this is an example of it. So to understand this flowchart, we need to basically get 3 yeses on the left-hand side of your screen or 1 no. So let's dive into this to make you understand this better. This is the first question. Does the normal native habitat of the species lie outside the political boundary of your country? Yes. The next question. Has the species established a reproductive population within the ecosystem boundary of your country? Yes. The next question. Are there any scientific reports on its adverse impacts on ecosystem functions? Yes, the species is invasive. Does the normal native habitat of the species lie outside the political boundary of the country? Bam, a no. The species is not invasive. So these frameworks basically help us understand, this basically changing complexity of invasive species or non-invasive species. And coming to an interesting question, this question has a bit of work from your end, so please listen to the rules very carefully. What is the most popular seafood dish in your neighborhood? So I am from Bombay and Goa, and basically I have several popular seafood dishes in my neighborhood, but I would like to know what's your popular seafood dish. And you have 10 seconds to answer this question. And we're going to request Admiral Chauhan to lend his glorious voice to basically have a countdown of these 10 seconds and go for it. Admiral Chauhan, would you please indulge in our request?
Yeah, okay. So here you go, guys. 10, 9. You need to type. 8, 7, 6. Seafood, guys, seafood. 5, 4, 3. Fish curry. Even I want to have some of that. Wait. 3, 2, 1. Last chance. Great. Kingfish was the last shot. Okay.
Thank you,
Nice.
sir. Okay, so super interesting answers, and a lot of you wrote prawns and prawn curry and prawn fry and pomfret and kingfish and ravas or something. In incredible things, incredible dishes. The most famous one in my neighborhood is prawns. I mean, you know, it's a wholesome product. You put rava fry, you put tandoori fry, you put it in noodles, you put it in pulao. It just goes so well with everything, and it's so yummy and accessible. It's comfort food basically. It's one of the most popular seafood dishes in my neighborhood, both in Goa, where my village is from, and in Bombay, where I got an education from. But did you know that most dishes of sizzling shrimp that are present are basically made from the white leg shrimp? And did you know that this is an invasive species? So let's trace back to what the white leg shrimp is. So it's basically, its natural distribution is from the eastern Pacific coast of Central and South America, from Mexico to Tumbes in Peru. But as it turns out, the white leg shrimp is not so friendly after all, and because of its fish farming cost and its cheap cost to fish farm and to sell, and because it's a very high selling product, it has now become invasive across the world, prominently in countries of the Northern American continent. Southern American, the other side of the coast, has now species that's become invasive in that entire coastal front. Europe, Africa, Asia, as you can see in your map, the distribution and the extent of it, and Oceania. So the adverse impacts of the white leg shrimp are several. They are capable of securing and ingesting a wide range of food. They are fast growing and have a high reproduction rate. They are known to modify natural benthic communities. So benthic communities are those species and the communities of such species that live on or near the seabed and the nutrient regimes of these ecosystems. They compete to monopolize food resources and are responsible for the transmission of pests and diseases to native species. So I was seeing a couple of things in the chat box, and some of you have said pomfret and a lot of other things. But there is also another popular seafood dish in my neighborhood, especially in Goa, which is basically the lobster. This red lobster that you want to order. It's the most expensive dish on your plate, and if you're taking your date out, you just have this mind that if I order a lobster, it's a sure shot, a sure shot catch. So this is a picture of a lobster thermid, a very well cooked one, in fact, and it's basically one of the most the species that is used in this is the American lobster. It is one of the most expensive and exotic lobster species used across the world, including India. Its natural distribution, it is native basically to the USA and the United States of America and Canada. But because of its Instagram-worthy, snob value, because of its popularity among the Michelin star restaurants and all the culinary chefs that we know about, it has now invaded the Northern European and even Japanese coastal waters. And this is a very preliminary study. We don't know how many other waters it has invaded, because studying invasive species is complicated. It has several challenges and several evolving factors due to climate change that keep coming across. The adverse impacts of the American lobster basically are towards disease. Like, they have several impacts, but when they were studied in the European coastal waters and Japanese coastal waters, it was found to have disease transmission to native species as one of the most threatening impact of this invasion. They are known to compete with local European lobster species and result in the reduction of marine ecosystem service values. They are also a threat to a loss, they are also a threat to or result in complete loss of endangered species. So basically, the American lobster is a lobster that has finished its degree, its master's, its PhD, its postdoc, and is now in its entire skill set of how to compete and monopolize for food, and how to, and I have the added advantage of disease transmission basically to the native species. And then you have the local lobster. So this is a lobster found from the Worli Koliwada, the Worli fishing village in Mumbai. I had gone on this lobster trip in 2019 to document the species. And this is the Panelurus homaris, a very local, very yummy lobster species, I can say from personal experience. And this is basically the native species present in Mumbai's waters and the western coast, along with other native species. And basically, this native species, like the European lobster, is still in its first year of degree, and it is basically competing with somebody who has a postdoc. So it has no idea why is it like now being, compete. Why is it in a competition for food? Why is the food resources being monopolized? And why are all the species of my community of my species family getting sick? And why do species, and so when you come back to the idea of invasive species, why do these species get introduced into the marine environment? Several factors, but the top three that I thought of while I was making this presentation was, first one, the snob value, that the fact that you want that lobster, you want that with this thing dish. Like all we can think of, even in the chat box, was pomfret, ravus, prawn. There are so many other species also that exist beyond its realm, so many native local species. And the snob value for exotic brands of seafood is one very prominent reason to this. Climate change, as Dr. Bajaj very elaboratively mentioned, on right from the roots of it to what we are seeing right now with regard to how much it has spread, and maritime activities, especially merchandise shipping and ballast water management, that Admiral Chauhan will please talk about. So how do these species become invasive? So basically you have a few conditions, like there has to be a suitable habitat condition, and the species needs to be introduced or adapted by itself or evolved because of climate change related factors, which then, once these conditions are met, results in they being competitors. So they compete with or feed on the native species. So they're not only, in the case of prawns and lobsters, we're talking about them competing with other native species, but in the next couple of slides, you'll see that they actually even feed on native species to basically monopolize and become the king or the ruler of the entire ecosystem. And this results in drastic change in or degradation of entire local ecosystems. So let's digress from seafood and let's talk about other marine invasive species. It's not just limited to seafood because of fish farming or aquaculture or all those other things that are not sustainably managed. We also have other marine invasive species like the elkhorn sea moss. It's basically a type of sea moss which is found to be invasive in these local species and spreads across huge blankets of, rocky tidal shore areas in several parts of the world. We have invasive species in jellyfish. In the jellyfish family, we have Phylorhiza puncta, which is basically an invasive jellyfish. So you have the issue of jellyfish blooms due to climate change, and now you have competition within them with who is more invasive and who is more, lethal. We have Dr. Bajaj spoke about corals, and he showed that amazing photo of corals which were beyond the benthos, which was towards like about 10-meter, 20-meter depth of diving towards the reef. But closer on the rocky shore also we have a lot of reef building corals, and this is a snowflake coral. This is found to be an invasive species in several parts of the world, and they basically alter existing reef systems completely. So not just climate change related threats, but you also have the threat of invasive species like the snowflake coral on these local native coral species that are already on the cusp of extinction or degradation. And you also have in the marine invasive species viruses, bacteria, fungi. This is an example of the tilapia lake virus, and I will, although this is an aquatic example, I'll connect on how it is related to the marine ecosystem. And I would also like to remember this fish that you can see, which is the tilapia fish. So I spoke about seafood. I've spoken about basically the other types of marine invasive species that are not just stuck to the gambit of what we know. But now I would like to show you the hit list. Basically, the next couple of slides, the next 4 slides actually, will show you the hit list of the most invasive marine species in the world and how they've come to be because of governance, mismanagement, or just unawareness about this entire issue. So the first one is the walking catfish. So the walking catfish is native to Southeast Asia. It is able to literally walk on dry land using its fins from one water body to another. So it can actually walk from a pond to an estuary to the ocean and back and have its entire, parade of destruction that it does in this entire system. The species was introduced in Florida in the 1960s for several reasons like fish farming, pest control, and so on and so forth. And they are now known to feed on these very same things. They are now known to feed on pond and aquaculture fish farms. So like the walking catfish, we have Mozambique tilapia. And I reminded you about the tilapia lake virus. The Mozambique tilapia is native to southeastern Africa. It is resistant to temperature changes and salinity levels. So the study of the species has shown that it is now resistant to changing temperatures and even salinity levels in their local environment. It has been introduced in over 90 countries on 5 continents for aquaculture and other purposes. The Mozambique tilapia has been declared by the Invasive Species Specialist Group, which is like the International Court of Justice for the most horrible criminals, to be amongst the 100 worst invasive species in the world. They harm native fish populations through competition for food and nesting spaces, as well as directly consuming small fish, which also include the native fish species in the region. The third one is the lionfish that we all know about and we see on Instagram, and we see a lot of spearfisher videos and scuba divers going behind them, chasing them. This is an invasive species. It is considered to be one of the most aggressively invasive species found in the world. It is native to the waters of Indo-Pacific. When I say Indo-Pacific, not the entire, but a small region of the Indo-Pacific and the Red Sea. And it is known for its long fins equipped with venomous spikes and their insatiable appetite. So a fun fact on the difference between venomous and poisonous is basically venomous is when somebody has the ability to inject the poison directly into you, if to defend itself or to do whatever it wants to do or to consume you basically. And poisonous is when you consume something and it can be yeah, I will share the presentation. Yeah, poisonous is when you consume something and it turns out to be lethal to you. So the lionfish is venomous because it will aggressively come to attack you if it feels threatened, or it's trying to defend itself or whatever it's trying to do. With very few natural predators, they cause significant damage to the biodiversity of already fragile reef systems where they are mostly present. Lionfishes are mostly present around reef ecosystems, and they threaten commercially important species of fish, which also impact local fishermen, local small-scale fisher livelihoods. The mosquito fish, which is basically the gambusia, and a lot of us have heard about using fish to control mosquitoes and stuff, and this is basically the mosquito fish. The gambusia is used for that very purpose. It was introduced throughout the world as a biocontrol mechanism to lower mosquito populations, which in turn has negatively affected many other species in the region. Mosquito fish in Australia are now classified as noxious pests and may have actually worsened the mosquito problem in many areas by outcompeting native invertebrate predators of mosquito larvae. So the fish that was brought to control the pest, the pest issue of mosquitoes has now become a noxious pest in the region. And they have actually worsened because the other natural predators of mosquito larvae, they have actually competed with them and reduced their numbers, which has actually, this thing, the entire issue. They compete aggressively with native species for food. They pose a threat to native species and also frog populations. And there is little to no evidence that they have actually controlled mosquito populations or mosquito-borne diseases. And Gambusia is not relevant to just freshwater spaces. They are also found in estuaries and other brackish water areas, and very few documentation reports on actually finding them even in the marine system. So they come from this, they stem from this entire process of what we see. So talking about the challenges of, of invasive species and what to do about it and so on and so forth, there is basically no coherent solution to curbing the outbreak of invasive species because each species has a different factor, has a different set of repercussions, has a different set of, destruction or degradation it causes. Unpredictability of regional and habitat expansion. So, like for example, with the walking catfish, you cannot predict in which region or which pond it will now be invasive because it will just become invasive overnight and you'll start seeing your entire fish farm almost empty of fish because it was feasted by a group of a community of walking catfish. The lack of data on broader impacts of invasive species on the marine ecosystems because there is a big lack of data of basically even native species. We require strong repositories of these, of whatever native species to understand what are invasive species now hurting our oceans, our estuaries, and our coastlines. And climate change impacts on the distribution of invasive species the changing climatic conditions, the factors that Dr. Bajaj mentioned, and how they impact even studying or understanding where these species are becoming invasive and what do we do about it. So we are now looking at innovative solutions. A lot of scientists are talking about innovation on how to compete with it. And this is actually a study in action that you are seeing. This is a scientist who is diving currently, trying to feed a lemon shark, a lionfish. Basically, he's trying to train the shark to start hunting lionfish with an aim to control its populations. And although these innovative solutions, may work or not work, there are other several reasons why this subject is important. One of the reasons is they impact native species and indigenous communities that depend on native species who have their entire socio-cultural livelihood and segment around these species. And so apart from, there are other causes of why marine invasive species are introduced in the environment. And I will digress from here and let me ask Admiral Chauhan to touch upon the subject of the other ways that marine invasive species are introduced in the ocean and marine ecosystem environment.
Thanks, Sarita. I'll do that if you could stop sharing your presentation, and Satyam or Oliver can give me sharing rights, and they have done so. So here we go. That was a fascinating set in any case of causes of the introduction of invasive species and their impact, but there's one more which touches all of us, and that is introduction of invasive species through ballast water. Here we have a situation where ships are actually moving from one place to another, picking up water in order to maintain stability as ballast in location A, then proceeding on a ballast voyage to location B, then discharging that water and taking in cargo. And in the process of discharging that water, they also discharge a massive amount of invasive species at the microscopic level, but also those with calcium as their exoskeletons. So they this for a long time proceeded unaddressed until the magnitude of the problem began to become known, and we found that if you looked at the numbers, there were 10 billion tons of ballast water transported each year, and there were 7,000 species transferred in ballast water every hour of every day. There was one new invasion every 9 weeks in some region of the world, which then suddenly found its entire local, sustainable, sustained food chain go for a complete bunt. And given that 80% of the world's trade is carried by ships, and given that 2.4 billion people live within 100 kilometers of the coast, the problem was huge. So the International Maritime Organization stepped in, and the Ballast Water Management Convention and the Ballast Water Management Code were introduced, and they still are in force. And are they wonderful? Are they welcomed by everybody? Far from it. The shipping community, in terms of the masters, the mates, the engineers, they are perfectly okay with this. But the shipping community comprising ship owners and ship managers, they are more resistant to this because this costs money. And then there are exceptions to the Ballast Water Management Convention, which concern navies. For example, yes, you have ballast water tanks and they carry the native species and they also carry non-indigenous species. And as you know, that changes place, as I've already mentioned. But there is, every ship has got a biofouling layer along its hull. And as the ship stays out for longer periods of time and biofouling increases, not only does that impact costs in terms of the drag coefficients that are enhanced in ship voyages, not only is all that happening, but also there is a whole lot of native species and non-indigenous species that are being exchanged thanks to the biofouling layer. Now, normally warships, auxiliaries, and state-owned vessels were quite comfortable being exceptions to this particular ballast water convention. The fact is now, as navies like the Indian Navy or other navies become much more regionally active and globally active, then this issue of the biofouling layer begins to play a significant role, even though warships do not require ballast water as such, except for tankers or large auxiliaries. But the fact that ships are now able to visit more countries, more ports, enter more harbors from a given destination to destinations which are many thousands of kilometers or nautical miles in some cases away, means that we have a problem of all kinds. Now, it's true that the Ballast Water Management Convention doesn't apply to cruise ships. It is also true that navies need to take a long, hard look at whether they are solving problems or how many of those problems they are actually contributing to. So with that short intervention of mine, I think that what we now need to do is take a quick look at the big picture once again, and maybe I'll once again call upon Dr. Pushp Bajaj to tell us a little bit about the big picture issue and take it from there. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and Pushp, you can start sharing yours, and then we can take it till the end. Pushp, we need you to move to full screen, and then we're ready to go. We can't hear you, Pushp. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, sir. So yes, so like Admiral Chauhan said, let's zoom out a little bit and let's look at the big picture. So we have talked about individual species, we have talked about native species, we have talked about invasive species, but all of them rely on some critical marine ecosystems. And you know, the ocean water body itself acts as a critical ecosystem. So like we have talked about before, that the ocean water body controls the climate, it controls the carbon cycle. So part of the atmospheric carbon that is in the atmosphere gets absorbed by the ocean water, and it's simply dissolved in the ocean water and stored there. Now, of course, not all of the atmospheric carbon is stored in the ocean, because if that were the case, then there would be no carbon in the atmosphere and there would be no greenhouse effect, more colder. But that's not true. So there is actually a constant interchange between the atmosphere and the ocean. So we have some atmospheric carbon that is being absorbed, and some of it is being released back into the atmosphere. So there is a constant cycle. Now let me also ask you, what is the other important marine ecosystems? So if you agree with me, maybe you could give me a thumbs up. Do you think phytoplankton should be incorporated as critical marine ecosystems? We have talked about them a lot, and you know they do provide a lot of oxygen, and they also form the base of the marine food chain. So if you agree, let me just see some thumbs up going on. If you agree that phytoplankton should be considered critical marine ecosystem. All right.
So there are lots of thumbs up that are coming, in a blitzkrieg.
Okay, great. So they're not in my view. So I guess I'll maybe refrain from thumbs up. So yes, you are correct. Phytoplankton should be considered as one of the critical marine ecosystems. What about mangroves? You know, mangroves were mentioned before by Captain Dixit in his opening remarks and also by Admiral Chauhan. So we have, again, yes, we do have some thumbs up going on. So mangroves do make a critical part of marine ecosystem. What about seagrass? You know, seagrass are also coastal ecosystems. They're just below the surface of the ocean water, and they are also important part of the marine ecosystem. What about corals? We talked a lot about corals and how they provide critical habitat, and they're also under threat from climate change. And that's a big thumbs up from Ajay. So we do have coral reefs that are part of the critical marine ecosystems.
And I want to jump in for a second and tell you that if seagrass is really a critical ecosystem, then as India develops ports and we go in for this Maritime India Vision 2030, and we've got dredging going on all over the country, then what is going to happen to all this is something that you need to think about and then talk to us at the end of that. So Push, please take it away again.
Absolutely. And that's what I was going to say next, that all of these critical ecosystems are under threat from climate change and also from human impacts. So for example, mangroves are under threat from deforestation, rising temperatures, sea level rise, and extreme weather events. Seagrass, as Admiral Chauhan just said, that they are under threat from dredging, which is necessary when you're building a new port and you want it to be accessible to the shipping vessels. Then we have rising temperature and extreme weather events that are also threatening seagrass. Then phytoplankton, we talked about this at length, that rising temperature, ocean stratification, and hypoxia are affecting phytoplankton species. Then corals are under threat from rising temperature, ocean acidification, and extreme weather events. So all of these systems are facing challenges. Now that was about the bigger ecosystems. So how do individual species respond to these changing conditions? Marine species are highly sensitive to environmental conditions such as temperature, oxygen, etc. And more so than terrestrial species, they are very sensitive to environmental conditions. And scientists have observed that there have been behavioral and physiological changes that many species have exhibited in the last few decades. So they have changed their breeding times, they have changed their feeding patterns, their body size and body mass. But these are slow changes in the sense that they take multiple generations for these changes to take place at a generational level in a marine species. In a more urgent way, though, there have been distributional changes that have also been observed. So most species, like most species, marine species too have the option to move both horizontally and vertically, in the sense that they can move to higher latitudes or they can move deeper into the ocean to escape the rising heat. And talking about escaping the rising heat, I mean, we are all very much familiar with this. You know, this image is looking at a traffic jam in Himachal Pradesh just last month. As the heat continues to rise in Delhi, you will see a lot of these images showing up in our news feeds because, all the Delhiites are trying to escape the heat and go to the mountains and have, a breath of fresh air. And so we are familiar with this concept, and other species do the same thing. And this image right here is actually showing how marine species are moving. So in this graph, on the x-axis is the latitude. So going towards the right, we are going to higher latitudes. And on the y-axis is the depth of the ocean. So going down, we go to deeper waters. And all of these lines here, the blue lines here, correspond to different species responding differently. So we can see that most of them are either going to the right, that is to higher latitudes, or they're going down towards deeper ocean waters, which are colder. And there are two species highlighted here, the Atlantic cod and the black sea bass, which are actually very important species in the Atlantic Ocean. So with that, we come to the next section, and we have talked about many challenges from many different places: climate change, human impacts, marine pollution, and it's quite a lot to take in. And I'm sure that your heads are spinning as well. But there are some things that we can do, that all of us can do at our individual levels and also as a collective society. So if I'll stop sharing my screen now and request Adnan Chauhan to take it away from here and tell us about how we can do something about this.
Right. So thank you very much, Pushp. And if Satyam, you can allow me to share screen. Thank you. And so the issue is that this is all great stuff, but at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, so hum kya kare? What is it that we can do? Not we when we reach some fancy place like the National Maritime Foundation, the Government of India, or the National Institute of Oceanography, or anything like that. But what about you? What is it that you can do? And there are a number of actually really important things that you can do, and we would like to just touch upon these for you to think about what is it that you can actually do. So Push will take this slide. I will advance the slide so that we don't have this continuous stop share, start share. Push.
Absolutely, absolutely. So starting with the first one, it's very important to examine your beliefs and actions and see if these are aligned. And if they are aligned, then you could make it into a paying career. Now, what does that mean? Quite often we feel very strongly about certain things. We feel that we are passionate about these environmental issues and how they're affecting our environment. However, when we look at our actions and when we see that we really making the right choices to mitigate some of these challenges, or are we contributing to the problem? So it's important to have every now and then have that examination of what we are doing in our day-to-day lives. And if you really feel strongly about some of these environmental issues, you could actually make it into a paying career. You could become a researcher. You could provide policy inputs to the government like we do at the NMF. I also know that there are some students in the audience that are doing a BTech or some sort of engineering. You could innovate. You could become an innovator or an entrepreneur that comes up with technological solutions to solve some of these problems. If you're interested in legal aspects, or if you're interested in law, you could become an environmental lawyer. And the list is endless. You could, whatever career path you choose, you could make it so that it is aligned with your beliefs when it comes to environmental issues. The second one, of course, is raise public awareness, and that is critical. That is what we are doing here. But it is, before we do that, it is important to educate ourselves first. So you have to make sure that you have the right facts, and that you get it from the right sources, and that it is, and that you have some idea of the bigger picture. Because often half knowledge is actually worse than no knowledge. So we have to make sure that we have a good idea so that we can then raise awareness among others. Then, of course, there is reduce, reuse, and recycle. So generally, we should be trying to purchase less. If you do purchase, then buy products that are made with recycled materials, and put the products that you purchase to as many uses as you can for as long as you can. And that is critical because every form of recycling does have some inefficiencies. Nothing is 100% recyclable. So we have to make sure that whatever we use it as much as we can so that we get the most out of it. Then the fourth point here is that make sure that you're buying fish that has been sustainably harvested. Avoid buying endangered species. Like Sarita was talking about during her presentation, that the decisions that we make in the restaurant or in our houses on our dinner table has implications for the larger marine biodiversity. So it's very important to keep that in mind, that we are buying fish that is sustainably harvested. Sir, you are muted.
Thanks. Thanks, Push. Let me ask Sarita if she would like to jump in and add some value to what you've some additional value to what you've been saying in terms of what is it that people can do. So, Sarita, would you like to take this one?
Yes, sir. So basically, I mean, as Dr. Bajaj mentioned, we feel very strongly about the marine environment. There are several careers you can go into and represent these issues or what you feel passionately about. At the fifth point that mentions advocate and support marine protected areas, donate whatever you can, whenever you can, donate your time, your effort, your money, and most of all, stand up to be counted. So obviously, when I was young, I didn't have the money to donate, but I gave in my energy, I gave in my time. I tried finishing my homework faster so I could go volunteer with the local, nonprofit and so on and so forth. So you can donate not just your money, but you can donate your time, your effort, your energy, and basically stand up to be counted. Develop education programs regarding the risks associated with invasive species and the exploitation. So you can start by witnessing what's around you, what you see around you. If you know that this is an invasive species, for example, like the white leg shrimp is an invasive species, start creating awareness programs within your local community. Make an Instagram creative and just put it on your Instagram maybe and say that, let's go local and let's start eating stuff that is locally grown and native to our region. Let's go and just being advocate for that. So you can start off with basic things like making these creatives on Instagram and sharing it on your profiles and developing education programs online or offline. Citizen science projects can reduce management response time and increase public support for the implementation of other control measures. Citizen science is a very budding subject, which is basically anybody who has a phone and who knows how to use a phone can basically help very complex scientific projects into collecting and documenting data. This even includes phytoplankton data, where we require a huge set of observations to understand where is the, where are the phytoplanktons present, where are the blooms happening, and where it could go, and who it could affect. So take part in citizen science projects. We have iNaturalist, which is a very big citizen science project where you see a small little insect and you don't know what it is. You just take a photo and you put it on iNat, and all the marine biologists or biologists who are on iNat will come and identify it for you and tell you if it's endangered also or not. It's a very fascinating way to understand our natural environment, especially our marine environment, which is so poorly and weakly developed within understanding and what is in it and how it is present. Avoid poor marine practices. Example, the reuse of fishing boats. Admiral Chauhan also will touch upon the subject on reusing of fishing boats. Recreational crafts, diving gear such as scuba equipment. So anybody who's a scuba diver knows that you have to be very mindful when you're going diving because it has some level of impact on the local ecosystem. And you have to carefully wash them down and manage and keep them operational. So these are a couple of things that you can do to help basically in mitigating the problem.
Right, thanks. And I want you to once again, thanks Sarita, and I want everybody to concentrate upon number 7. Look, we are about to launch a project called the Marathon. Marathon as in marine and thon from the marathon. And it's a long-term project. And what are we looking for? We want to ask people, where is the Indian buoyant slat? Buoyant slat is this Dutch inventor of the boom that collects garbage in the ocean. And so we don't have that problem, but we've got huge amount of talent. Much of it is represented right here in this workshop with you, your engineers. And so we want to be able to go to engineering colleges and say, okay, we will give you a certain price, we will give you a certain amount of encouragement by monetary means or by other means, and what we want are thousands of ideas. We want people to say, I can do this. This is relevant to my small hamlet, or this is relevant to my coastal stretch, or and I can bring science to bear on it. So while we advocate, while we make policy recommendations where we are really lacking in our ability to handle the potential is in the science and engineering colleges. So that's where we want to be able to emphasize the need for you to stand up and be counted. Do not just be a minimal sort of minimalistic, listener to these things. We've already messed up the planet quite a lot, and we can't afford to do that, at least not in India anymore. So join projects such as regional and local World Wildlife Programs. Join the IMF, which runs some fantastic programs of their own. If you're going to do beach cleanup, try and make sure that your beach cleanup effort is part of a full system, and it's not just that you collect the garbage from the beach, you wear these fancy t-shirts, you put the garbage into bags, photographers come and take your photographs, you can say, mommy, look at me, or you can impress all the girls or the boys, as your case might be, and then you find that the plastic has gone back into the sea. So we need a full system, and that needs systems approaches, and that is what our young people must be able to do, not just do beach cleanup, but do beach cleanup with a full system backing it. Join biodiversity cells of your state. There are biodiversity cells in states, in provinces, in districts, in local governments. There are projects run by NGOs. There are projects such as Reef Watch, Terra Conscious, Coastal Impact. Some of them are commercial. Some of them promote tourism. No issue. Make money. But make the planet better. So join the Society for Marine Research and Conservation. The marine ecosystem restoration in changing European seas is not something that I want you to join. It's something from where we need to draw, and we need to draw best practices and see what's going on. How does Emertox work? What does the Ocean Foundation do? The NMF has deep ties with a lot of these places. Protect Our Planet is a young people's movement all around the world, once again, in which the National Maritime Foundation is deeply invested. And because we are connected with the Indian Maritime Foundation in Pune, we feel that there is much scope because yeah, we can handle the policy makers and the policy wonks and all that, but Pune is where the youth of India resides. Pune is India's future. Delhi is at the best India's present and mostly India's past. The future lies in Pune and in all the places in India in which young people grow and thrive. Finally, push your lawmakers to support marine conservation measures, including ballast water management. I need you to maybe I should tell you or push for somebody to tell you what is it that we are doing for marine biodiversity and what are our ongoing projects over and above the marathon. But keep your eyes and your ears tuned to this marathon. Push, do you want to tell them anything in 10 seconds about each of these? We are clean out of time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very briefly, so we do have an ongoing project which is trying to understand the biophysical changes in the Arabian Sea and their impacts on the marine biodiversity and blue economy. The Arabian Sea is changing very fast. The temperatures are rising, the stratification is occurring, there is less dissolved oxygen now present in the Arabian Sea. It is becoming one of the largest dead zones in the world, and that has impacts on the marine life and also on the blue economy. We are also assessing the role of coastal and marine ecosystems in the blue economy and for climate change adaptation. Ecosystems like mangroves, coral reefs, and seagrass, they're very good natural defenses against extreme weather events such as tidal flooding and sea level rise. So we need to understand how we can harness their potential in providing us with adaptation measures against climate change. We are also looking at promoting regional cooperation in the Indian Ocean region to promote and conserve marine biodiversity. Of course, the marine species do not know any international boundaries. They do not understand the concept of maritime zones. So for that, it becomes very important that we have regional cooperation because no one country can take on this challenge alone.
Yeah, thanks, Push. So once again, to emphasize what Dr. Bajaj has just mentioned, that these are some of the projects which are ongoing. I'm very proud to be able to tell you that the National Maritime Foundation is one of the winners, one of the only 23 winners out of almost 2,000 entrants of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure Fellowship. And Dr. Bajaj and his colleagues at the NMF are working in this. Many people seem to think that the NMF is all about geopolitics and strategy and high-end navy, and it is all about that as well. But it is also about the environment in which we live. Our concept of the whole maritime policy structure is two pillars: the blue economy and holistic maritime security, which is more than military security alone. We need you to help us. We need you. We can provide focus. We can provide access. We can do some of the things, but we can't do all of those things. Only you can fill all those gaps that actually need to be filled by us. So our team, both at the senior management level, we are extremely privileged to have Admiral Sunil Lamba, the former Chief of the Naval Staff, as our chairman. And in fact, the NMF has as its chairman a rotating chairmanship tenanted by the Chief of the Naval Staff who last demitted office. Captain Sarajit Parmar is a one-man dynamo within the organization. Law is handled almost exclusively in terms of its mentoring by Commander Anand Kumar. And of course, the Blue Economy and Climate Change, or the BECC cluster, is one of the most dynamic clusters within the NMF. And you've seen some small sampling by Dr. Bajaj. That means the two flanks and Sarita Fernandez. But I also want to make particular mention of some exquisite work being done in the blue economy by Mr. Saurabh Thakur and by Chimi Udon, who are both KK Nair fellows. That means that we have a fellowship established in memory of our chairman emeritus, and it is doing, the first project is all about the resilience of coastal urban agglomerates such as Mumbai. Mumbai is drowning and it is waving. And we are telling you that you're not waving, you are drowning. And so we need to do much about it. We need to join hands. It doesn't matter whether you are a member of the NMF or a member of the IMF, you are a member of, or a member of India, you are a member of the human species. And we either will thrive together or we will die together. Remember one thing, as far as India is concerned, either India will be a maritime power in the next 100, for the next 100 years, over the next 100 years, either India will be a maritime power or India will not be a power at all. And with that, I think I'll bring my presentation to a close, just to once again highlight the fact that we have a lot of good partners in climate action. The Indian Maritime Foundation is occupying pride of place, but we are formally interacting with the World Sustainable Development Forum, the Protect Our Planet movement in the US, the Ocean Foundation also in the US, the India-Japan Laboratory at Keio University in Japan, RICA, which is Resilience Innovation Knowledge Academy in New Delhi, and with Mexico, we have the Instituto Politécnico Nacional, which is part of the University of Mexico and doing biotechnology. Guys, my last message to you before we start to take up the Q&A and look at the chat box is, once again, join us. We want to be a maritime power for the good. We don't want to be the Darth Vader of the ocean. Thank you so much. So now we will stop. I'll stop sharing and we will take a look at the chat box and try and interact with you as much as time will now allow us to do. So once again, thank you so much to my co-panelists, Dr. Push Bajaj and Sarita Fernandez, and all the various people who have put this together, our research support team of very hardworking people, Satyam Shekhar and Supriya Joshi and Dr. Oliver Gonzalez. Thank you once again. And thank you to the IMF for affording us the opportunity. Next time when we have a lecture to the IMF, I would like to give it myself, and it will be about types. What is the difference between these various types of ship, destroyer, battleship, frigate, and how did it come about? What is the differences of the types? What is the difference between a type, a class, a project, etc.? And I would like to propose that. It is for the IMF to decide, but we need you all the time for everything that we do. Stop sharing now. And now we will look at the chat box and try and see how many of these can be answered as quickly as we conceivably can. So let me go from the top downwards. And so we'll skip the prawn curry, etc., which we've already enjoyed. And come to, would we share the presentation? Yes, we will. We will share a PowerPoint in a PDF version of it. Please send us an email as a request from us. One thing some of us can do is to get larger and thriving Indian shipping, mercantile marine practice, port-led development of shipping, first by stopping draft maritime acts. I couldn't agree with you more. When the maritime draft acts are put into the public domain, there should be a huge upsurge of debate, not necessarily in support, not necessarily adversarial, but a debate, so that people say, otherwise Delhi has this proclivity of thinking that the strategic interests of India extend up to Gurgaon. And so we need to continuously tell them, hello, once again. And I entirely agree with you, state responsibility to crew, waste management, defined maritime limits, yes, and yes. And so Gajinder that is Sudhir, I entirely agree with you. And this is something that we would like you to talk to us about, talk to the IMF, talk to people, stand up, as I said before, and be counted. The NMF had regional chapters, and Rishi Atreya is proposing that we revisit this and reinstitute it. Rishi, there are some issues that are lying, which are organizational and structural, and therefore this is being reviewed once again. What are some non-profit organizations that we can volunteer around Pune? In fact, you should be telling us, but we will be happy to inform you of some of them. And Sarita, if you if Aditya, you get in touch with Sarita Fernandez, she would be very happy to put you in touch with a few of them. Some of them I've already mentioned in the last penultimate slide. And then questions so far, we've already answered. This is my team trying to put structure into all this. So thank you very much to them. Commodore Ajay Chitnis, I just second what he says there, that the IMF is doing simply smashingly wonderful work, and we all need to join hands with them and they with us, and so on and so forth. So if I've missed some areas, yeah, seagoing vessels from Pranav Dudhat follow Marpol, and it is followed by treating sewage and sewage treatment plants. Yeah, how does breaking down of sewage help in conserving biodiversity? It prevents in the introduction, it stops the introduction of invasive species. When you have a water filter in your home, don't you have a reverse osmosis plus ultrasonic plus ultraviolet? And these are one set of solutions. The other set of solutions are when you introduce chemicals. And chemicals and the introduction of bacteria, which break down sewage water, transform it into clear water, remove the sludge, and thereafter pump that water as ballast water into the oceans. So yeah, what happens to the sewage treated with aerobic bacteria after it is pumped overboard is a very, very, very good question. And it's an area that we would like to research along with you. So if you've got ideas, we are very, very welcome of them. So once again, youth programs we can enroll in, and monetary and fiscal policies like carbon pricing and taxation. Will they help to make the ocean bluer? They might, they will. But the oceans are not blue because this term blue economy is being hijacked by economists. The blue economy is not the same as the ocean economy. The ocean economy produces inputs into the national GDP. The question to be asked, as I said earlier, is not that. It is how blue is your economy. That means if I only wanted to increase exports, reduce imports, and utilize fish as an example, and mind you, tuna is a huge earner of foreign exchange for India. But if I do this simply to increase my GDP and I do not pay attention to the maximum sustainable yield, I do not adopt local practices, I try and do everything from New Delhi, where the guys in New Delhi, the policymakers, have never been in a fishing boat in their lives. But we need to be able to take advantage of local knowledge, of local structures. We need to change the way. Do you know that in terms of marine environmental laws, there are practically no guidelines once you go down from state to district, from district to town, from town to village, from village to hamlet? Zero. All this needs to be done first. Then simultaneously, we can address issues which are fiscal and taxational in nature, seeking to make disincentives and incentives appropriately for big companies to handle. So I think insofar as questions really are concerned, do you think that India should adopt a Gandhian approach of balancing economic benefits? I am very averse to assigning labels which are convenient and fashionable. I think that it doesn't matter whether you attach one individual's name to it or another, howsoever brilliant he might have been. We are all in deep reverence of Gandhi, and there are core truths in everything that we know of, and we should simply address those core truths. Are we moving towards a time where we can expect confrontation? We're already there. for fishing rights beyond the EEZ. Do you know the problem in Somalia and piracy is starting from and continuing with fishing, the problems of fishing? So I think that with that, I have no other questions really to ask. Insofar as rising temperature, are melting polar ice caps an extreme example of this? Yes, they are. Here's a question for Push. Is it just temperature that affects coral bleaching, or other factors such as pH or something else altogether?
Yes. Yeah. So the phenomena of bleaching in itself is because of temperature. It's because when the temperature rises, the microorganisms that are living on the coral surface, they dispel. But there are other factors that affect the overall health of the coral reefs. And one of them, like you mentioned, is pH, the ocean acidification. So as the acidification increases, that can hinder the growth and recovery period of the coral reefs after a bleaching event. So you're right, there are some other factors that affect the overall health of the coral reef system.
Thanks, Push. Gargi has a question for, I guess, for me. If phytoplankton needs sunlight for photosynthesis, why do they migrate to cooler areas so that they can continue to exist? If you don't exist, then you can't do photosynthesis. So they go, because the temperatures, they are sensitive to temperature as an existential threat. So when this existential threat appears, the phytoplankton either dive deep into the ocean or, as Push has already described, go towards northern cooler latitudes. When they do that, it's not that there is no photosynthesis taking place there. The amount of photosynthesis taking place in frigid waters is obviously less than in temperate waters, and that is less than in tropical waters. Nevertheless, if the phytoplankton die, then the marine food chain comes to a grand halt there and then. So then the fish start to migrate towards areas that there are phytoplankton. And so you've got tropical fish now being found in Norwegian waters. So are the Norwegians thrilled? Of course they're thrilled. Who is unhappy? We. Our fishermen haven't got any fish left because the whole food chain is shifting on account of our inability to handle what Captain Dixit mentioned as anthropogenic factors in the ocean space. So does land reclamation also affect marine ecosystems? So Sarita, this is something that you've been battering your head against for a long time. Yes.
Yes, sir. So yeah, I mean, I was just answering the question. I got it on my private chat also. So yes, land reclamation is an established factor of to degrade marine ecosystems because the coastline, which is the rocky shores, mangroves, coral reefs, seagrass, are also the nursery ground for all the deep sea fishes. So all the deep sea fishes come to the coastline to lay their babies, and the babies grow because they have a lot of protection gears to protect them before they are pushed into the big blue sea with all the big predators out there to eat them, as part of the entire marine food web. So when you basically come and make a road on a big rocky shore, or you go and remove a couple of mangroves to, make a nice 5-star hotel, you're basically taking away the future of the amount of food catch that would be available fish catch that would be available in terms of livelihoods, and also other species are on the brink of extinction. Sea turtles come to the coast from the deep sea, for example, to lay their eggs. So that's the dynamic that we need to understand. And when we do a lot of activities like coastal reclamation, these are the impacts, the irreversible impacts. You cannot get a reclaimed coast back. So these are the irreversible, repercussions it has on these ecosystems.
Yep. And so when you're making and you're rooting for the Worli Sea Link and the extended coastal roads and the elevated roads, we are not saying that we should stop all development. We are saying that we should develop sustainably. That is what we are saying. And I think Supriya has indicated a series of methods by which you can use social media or directly talk to us. And it's on the chat box, and I would strongly request you to utilize it, copy and paste it, and then you'll be able to talk to us all the time. And we are always, always delighted to do these workshops. As I said, I'm hoping that the next workshop or the next interactive presentation will be approved by the president and the vice presidents of the Indian Maritime Foundation, and we will keep swinging from one topic to another so that you're all the time engaged in some manner or the other with us. So next time, frigates, battleships, destroyers, all these jazz, and trying to figure out what is what and why do they call them, all this stuff. So from my side and from Dr. Pushp Bajaj and from Sarita Fernandez, we too would like to give the IMF and all of you a big thumbs up. We would like to have ended this thing with a huge round of applause for you, but I hope that you will accept. You need a big hand, but I hope you'll accept 3 small hands clapping, like pairs of hands clapping like hell for you. So thank you so much, and I will hand over the proceedings back to Satyam and to Captain Dixit for any closing remarks that he might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Admiral Chauhan. As you mentioned, I would first request Captain Dixit if he wants to give any closing remarks, sir. Captain Dixit, can you hear us? Captain Dixit?
Yes, I'm just coming in.
Sir.
It was such a comprehensive workshop covering so much of the topic that there is very little to say to sum it up. But I would particularly like to mention some of the points brought out by Push and Sarita. The rising graph of the temperature, the worldwide, and impacting the oceans. That is something we really need to think about very carefully. And what would be our contribution to that? Because that is something we can do on the land. Try to reduce in our small way to bring down the global temperature, or at least slow down the rate of the rise. That is the one thing. And we learn a lot of new things from Push, the stratification, the ocean levels that takes place. And from Sarita, the invasive species, what we can do to avoid consuming them and to discourage the market for it in the end. We have a number of young people here, and for some of them, this would be the first experience, first exposure to this kind of a debate. I would just request them, advise them to keep in contact with these organizations, IMF in Pune, NMF in Delhi, and with each other through either of them. And our contact details are available in the brochure that has been put out. So let this workshop not end here and we all go home and forget about it. Let us take it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Captain Dixit, for your closing remarks. Students, ladies and gentlemen, I really hope that you had a rewarding experience while participating in the workshop. But before we wind up, may I urge you to please stay here for a minute and participate in our feedback polling, which is of great significance to us as organizers. You will see a set of 4 questions flashed on your screen. Each question gives you multiple options to choose from. And hence, may I now request you to kindly select and lock your answers for each question and press the submit button after you are done doing that. So these questions will be flashed on your screens for about maybe 30 seconds so that all of you are able to lock your response. So I'll wait for another 20 to 15 seconds.
I have almost 50% response now, so maybe another few seconds, and we should have most of the people responses.
Certainly, we can wait for another 15 seconds.
Okay, so I'll close it in the next 10 seconds.
So Pushpa, I think we can close the polling.
Yeah.
Well done.
I think Captain Commodore Chitnis wanted to say something. Is that?
No, I just want to say thank you very much. Excellent video as usual.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you, audience. Thank
Dr.
you.
Bajaj, Sarita. Very good.
Great. Thank you. So we will catch up with you perhaps as soon as we possibly can work out a date schedule, and then we'll progress from there. And as I said, our intention is to engage Pune, to engage the schools, to engage the universities across India and abroad. So once again, a special thanks for those of you who joined us from distant locations, whether in Turkey or in Latin America or anywhere else. So thank you very, very much. Most of all, thank you, Pune. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I hope you remember 3rd October. Sir.
Yes, of course. Of course. Right, so we will then gracefully exit and catch up with one another, hopefully, as soon as we conceivably can. Thank you once again. Have a great evening. Thank you. Captain Dixit, with your permission, we will exit left.
One good thing I will join another celebration. Our club managed to give 50,000 vaccinations all over Pune, and COVID vaccination, a project called Vaccination on Wheels.
Oh, great.
Go around to various places and give vaccinations. And we've crossed 50,000 today, having a virtual celebration.
Yes, we would like to join in that virtual celebration, and many, many congratulations on the wonderful work that you all are doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Before we close, may I make a suggestion?
Yes.
We have a few teachers here. Why not have a workshop exclusively for teachers? Because they have a subject called environmental protection and so on in the syllabus now, the curriculum for the schools. We could impart more knowledge, some of our experience and inputs from scholars, researchers. We could put it to the students much more meaningfully.
Yeah, I entirely agree. The range of the